So just to remind you why we are working on TB, this is what you see. This is a report from WHO that came out in 2014. And in this paper, in this report, what they asked for is a test, a non-sputum-based test for diagnosis of TB that can be a triage test, meaning that the community workers can go out in the healthcare workers can go out in communities, screen people to figure out who needs to be tested further, bring them into clinic, and try to see whether they really need to be treated or not. The reason this particular workflow is required, so the reason that instead of waiting for patients to come into clinic, there is a need for going into the communities, is that 1/3 of the world has latent TB infection. 10% of those, the lifetime risk, so is about 10%. So 10% of these people at some point in their lifetime would have active TB. The regions where this is prevalent is usually a very resource poor area. So Africa, India, China. And because this patient and some of the places are very far from clinic, there is no clinic anywhere close by. Like one of the trial location for us is in Madagascar, where the closest hospital is a 12-hour walk. There is no road, right? And because of these logistical issues, 1/3 of the active TB cases, so the 10% that actually develop active TB, do not get diagnosed. They never show up in the healthcare. So last year, for example, we missed 4 million active TB diagnoses. This was completely missed. So the estimate was we missed 1/3. It's actually 40%, little over 40%. So that's why WHO is asking for this test. Now there is a test, something that's sputum-based, but that only works when patient is really sick. They already have a disease progress to active TB, and they start coughing, and that's when they can generate sputum, and then the current technology allows looking for the bacterial DNA. But that's too late. By that time, on average, every active TB patient infects on average 20 other people before they get diagnosed, right? So we need to be able to diagnose them much earlier, before they become symptomatic, so that they are not infectious. So that's why WHO put out this this report, where they ask for certain characteristic of a test, what the sensitivity, specificity, negative predictive value, and so on. So we tackled this problem by looking at data that already exists, so something that's publicly available. We took this data, about 2,600 samples, 14 independent cohorts, and it came from 11 countries. The reason we went for this heterogeneity is we are not the first one to do this. There are a lot of other people have tried to address this problem, but the problem there is it's usually confounded by it works in one country but doesn't work in another country. Works in one age group, doesn't work in another age group. HIV patients who also have TB, the current standard of care also doesn't work. So there are a lot of problems. So we wanted to address that head on by saying we are going to account for all the heterogeneity from the beginning. And what we came up with is only a 3-gene signature in whole blood. What that means is you don't need anybody to cough up sputum, number one. So you can identify, if this test works, you can identify them earlier and you don't need to have sputum, number one. It's not confounded by HIV co-infection. So if you have active TB going on, whether you have HIV or not, that's immaterial. It still diagnoses active TB accurately. It's not confounded by BCG vaccination. So a lot of people get a BCG vaccination. In US, we don't give vaccine, but India, China, Africa, that's before they are the age of 5, they all get BCG vaccination. It's not very effective, but not giving them is also, like some people are arguing, it's a human rights issue. What we were able to show in this paper was that we actually met what WHO target product profile was. this is not what we set out for. We sort of set out for, can we look at this problem differently? But first shot on the goal, we found that we are actually meeting the WHO target product profile that called out for 90% sensitivity and 70% specificity. We actually meet that. What the numbers you see there is optimal threshold, but it's actually we are meeting it. So as the sensitivity goes up, specificity would go down. And most importantly, the number to look for is negative predictive value. So if you assume 10% prevalence worldwide, each country would have slightly different prevalence. But if you were to assume 10% prevalence as a general risk, our negative predictive value is 99%. What that means is, if you were to run this test 100 times and it came back negative all 100 times, 99 of those patients, you can be very confident that they do not have active TB. You can leave them. You can say you do not need to come into the clinic. So that's number one. And then those who do feel like they have the test says positive, you can bring them into the clinic.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Khatri. So as I think you have a sense for now already, this 3-gene signature really could be a game changer in global health. And it's already changed the game for us, the EteRNA game. Dr. Khatri and I met at a conference before the release of his tuberculosis signature. And I'd given a talk on EteRNA, and he had given a talk on finding these gene signatures. And he came to me and said, hey, we have RNAs, these genes are RNAs. Can you make an RNA molecule that can sense this signature? I said, why? Why do you want us? You can just do a PCR assay. And the issue right now is that these PCR-based assays are still very expensive, very unlikely to be deployable to the point of care. And whereas there are tests, molecular tests, style tests that you can have a point of care, and maybe some of you have seen this, like a pregnancy test, where sitting inside this piece of paper are molecules, antibody molecules that can detect not RNA genes, but hormones that exist in the urine of pregnant women. This is actually quite cheap and could be deployable to basically anywhere. But what Pravesh was asking for was to have such a cheap test, but not to detect a single hormone, but to detect these 3 RNA genes and only light up a red line if these genes, if the ratio of products, the one I've shown here in the box, are above a certain threshold. Okay, and so this sounds like science fiction. How would you make such a gene? We don't know of any antibodies that can do this, but we sat down and worked out on a napkin. Okay, maybe there's a EteRNA puzzle that could create an RNA instead of an antibody that could measure the signature and only light up, show you a colored spot if the signature is above or below a certain threshold. And that was the genesis of the OpenTB puzzle. And we started preparing for this as a community in January of 2016. We had a banner up, get ready for OpenTB. And in that period, our team came together to create a puzzle that many of you are now familiar with. I'm going to just go and play this movie. We wanted to design a molecular calculator, a piece of RNA, which has binding sites for the reporter, which I've shown in this pink arrow, and 2 of the C oligos, or the KLF2 RNAs, which I've shown marked with these orange oligos. And it should also have binding sites, but arranged in some very sophisticated way that could potentially sense GBP5 and DUSP3, the other 2 genes, which we often call A and B inside TB. And we want to set it up so that as you, the players, toggle between 4 states, in 3 of the states, we wanted to maintain the binding sites for the 2 Cs in the reporter, but in the final state where the threshold is crossed, there should be a rearrangement of the structure. So this is going to play again. This is the first 3 states, which should show one structure, and then the dramatic rearrangement when the A and the B product goes above the product of C squared. So again, this was, it took us quite a bit of time to figure out how to instantiate this as a puzzle. And I want to give first of all, to thank the developers who made this happen. So And many of them are actually here. And so I hope we can give a round of applause to Ome, Michelle Wu, Ben Keep. And so thank you very much for putting this together. This required, and then El Nando, Jay Nicole, and Caleb Jeunesse, who may be here online. Let's also give them a round of applause. So in particular, this required putting in the new pack model which allows for multiple strands. It requires, as we heard yesterday from WH Bob, required putting in the freeze button and several other new features to make this puzzle even playable. When we launched it, we weren't even sure if it was solvable, okay? Nando had found a solution by accident. I was not able to reproduce it, okay? So we don't even know if this is solvable in the game. But we went ahead and launched it. We are also grateful for the work of our media team and our collaborators. So that's Sharif Izzat, who's also here. Let's give him a round of applause. And Pravesh Khatri and Dr. Tim Sweeney on his team. So again, thank you, Pravesh. So that was the launch video. We had a very nice article written about the challenge in the Wall Street Journal, and many, many hits to the website. And as I think many of you remember, there was an influx of players, and we all welcomed them to come and try to tackle this new challenge. We helped them through this new puzzle progression. There's also been quite a bit of innovation in the realm of the experiments. And so we had to develop or update our experimental pipeline that involves PCRs and putting things on those instruments you saw yesterday, and then a sophisticated data browser package. And so there, in addition to the site development by Ome and others, we would like to thank, again, Johan Andreasen, Ang Kladwang, and Will Greenleaf very much for their help on the experiment. So this is the time, really, this is the biggest challenge we've ever launched in EteRNA, and it required innovation on every single front. Okay, so what happened? We launched OpenTB May 2016. And as I said, these are the hardest lab puzzles we've ever launched on EteRNA. And then amazingly, we got 36,000 player solutions for the TB puzzles over the next 3 rounds, over the next few months of EteRNA, despite the difficulty of these puzzles. And we collected over 20 million data points on these customized hacked sequencer instruments that the Greenleaf Lab has developed for EteRNA. So before I tell you the results, I want to tell you one, I think, really beautiful result that Ben Keep and I have been exploring. Before OpenTB, our lab puzzles had been getting harder and harder. Okay, the switches had been getting harder to solve. Fewer people were actually playing the labs, and so Ben had been monitoring statistics. If a player had come and joined EteRNA 3 months before any given lab puzzle, what was the probability that he or she would then contribute actual lab solutions? What we're seeing is that for many of these puzzles, if you start in the top left, the next gen 1, the logic gates, there are very few people, only basically 2 players who are new players who were actually able to contribute. If I showed you all the players, of course, many of the veteran expert players are contributing, but we weren't getting the new ideas that we really fuel the creativity on EteRNA. But because of the new puzzle progression, and I think because of all of the help by the community, tutorials by, I think many of you know, by Eli Fisker and others. For the very first TB puzzle, we had this many new players all contributing solutions. It's incredibly diverse. And this, I think, has been key to finding solutions that I'm going to reveal now. Okay, before telling you the results of the A times B over C squared puzzles, which are the full-fledged TB score puzzles, as many of you remember, we had some simpler puzzles, which themselves were challenging, that tried to measure A times B, or A over C, or B over C. And what I'm showing you here is over the 3 rounds of TB, the so-called fold changes, and I can talk about that in more detail what that means, but that Johan and Michelle have been computing for these puzzles. And what's wonderful to see is that for almost every puzzle, even on the first round, folks have achieved fold changes of greater than 1, and in many cases have gone right to the maximal limit of what the laws of physics allow. Those are in black. There's a few players who, as Johan alluded to yesterday, have been having a cheat where they have more than 1 binding site and they're able to go over the line, and that may actually help us devise even more sensitive threshold signatures. But this is not yet the A times B over C squared. I just want to show you the number of solutions that we've gotten and the success even on the first round that people have looked at these simpler puzzles. And I also want to point to different players are colored by different colors here. There's a huge number of colors. In fact, we have only colored on the order of 12 players here by the colors, and there's a whole bunch of other people that are all grouped together as other or gray. I'm showing you here the other set of puzzles that we had for OpenTB, where we just asked people to create single sensors. Those are meant to be get people started into TB, the kind of easy starter puzzles. And here, almost all the solutions are gray. All of these people are basically new players, and there are hundreds of maybe thousands of very different people who've all contributed to this project. Okay, and that's okay. So now keep that in mind, the diversity of the people who have been contributing. Now let me show you the results for A times B over C squared. Okay. On the left is the A times B over C squared decrement puzzle, where the molecule is fluorescent when the TB signature, when the concentrations of A, B, and C are such as they would be for an unhealthy patient, and then the fluorescence disappears when the A, B, and C concentrations are as they would be for a healthy patient. Okay? The right-hand one is the opposite. Okay, we tried for both because either one would be useful for a point of care test. And you can see that for all the rounds, we achieved puzzles where the global fold change, which if it's above 1, gives us a reasonable test. We had solutions that were above 1, except for this one. And then for this one, what we call round 1 of 5, or the second round of the OpenTB puzzles, we had numerous solutions that went up above what would be maximally achievable for this kind of calculator, so around 9 or 10. So again, I want to point, okay, there's two things to point out here. One is the diversity of people, again, many colors. Many people have contributed such good solutions. The other thing I want to point out, and as some of you remember, we achieved success in this round 1 of 5, much more success than even round 1 of 4, the first round. And what happened between these two rounds actually was not just learning from experimental data. It was players on the forums and chats telling the developer team, hey, you should be using different 20 nucleotide subsets of the probe that we think are going to be more optimal for designing calculators. That feedback was collected by OME in, I think, a now classic thread on the GetSet forums, and redefined the reporter probes and the A, B, and C subset oligos that we decided to use. When we changed that over, even on the first time people had those new sequences to design calculators for, we achieved success. Interestingly enough, for those probes, we saw worse results for the decrement, for the ink puzzles compared to the deck puzzles, and we still don't totally understand that. And that's partly why I'm really excited about having our discussion focused on the OpenTB puzzles today, with several of the major contributors are going to be giving talks. Okay? So just to show you what does it really mean? What does that score really mean? I'm going to show you some of the experimental results summarized in a single graph. And this is a style of graph that, again, I want to attribute to Johan and Ome for coming up with. It's a summary graph for a single design. On the left here, we're showing you what we would want in a design calculator. As a function of the 3 different input RNA concentrations, we want that calculator to, in this case, bind a probe and turn on below this plane and turn off above the plane. That's what the yellow versus blue means. So this is ideal. On the right here is one of about 100 designs that we have that look almost perfectly calculate the signature. Okay, in this case, these calculators are on, which is blue here, below the line, and then off above the line. Okay, and now we have hundreds of these. So it's very convincing that these calculators are carrying out this measurement of the molecular signature, at least in vitro. But it's, for me and for many of us, this is shocking that this is possible. I want to emphasize that if we just had the first round where we designed the molecules, where the expert team had sent out the input molecules and the reporter molecules, we wouldn't have this. And if we didn't have, and as I'll show you, if we didn't have a diversity, I think, of people who are taking part in this, we also wouldn't have these calculators. Okay, so this is why we need the entire EteRNA community. Okay, so now, I showed you a whole cloud of points from the entire community. You might be wondering, were there any players who had unusually remarkable strategies that we can learn from? So here, Michelle has helped us break out the fold changes for that A times B over C squared decrement puzzle by player. I masked out the names, but I just want to show you that these are different players. You can see there are some players who are contributing hundreds or thousands of solutions. This is even before the booster, okay? So, I mean, for you guys who contributed it, you know how much work this is. But for us who didn't contribute but tried to play the puzzle, this is awe-inspiring, how many solutions that you were able to deliver, okay? And you can see that, you know, almost every player was able to give us solutions that were above 1, which is the, kind of the limit for having a OK calculator. There are some players here, though, that are kind of unusually good. I think you'll see. On the very left in red, we certainly want to know what that player was doing, because almost all of that player's solutions are essentially perfect. Those are the best solutions we have. Okay? And then these two people were on a team, actually, and they developed a computer algorithm together that produced another subset of solutions. And then there's another really fascinating player who submitted a lot of solutions, a few of which were really at the extreme tail of what we've got. So I'm going to go ahead and reveal to you at least who these players are. Okay, you can find out the other ones if you want to go look at the data tables that are online. But I think let's give a special round of applause to these folks. Andrew K is the one here on the left, and we're going to hear from him in a little bit.